Okay, well, I'm proud enough to say that I'm young enough that I never owned a horse and a buggy. And I won't ask you, Keith, if you did, if that was the one that you owned with your license plate on it, or what that was about. I know you didn't share Whiteside, but did you share the horse and buggy? We'll leave that question unanswered, all right? Okay, thank you all again. I'm going to go through just in a couple of minutes our financial update. I do want to make sure we save time for questions. If the last hour was any indication, I'm sure you have a lot of questions about especially what Keith and David had to say related to our buildings and our church plans. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, a couple of fun facts for the year that I'll just leave up there for you. A couple of things that I'll highlight. We had a lot more donors to the missions funds, the various missions funds that we run last year than we did in the past. So evidently a lot broader engagement. Some of those donors were donating to some of you who were taking short-term missions trips. So that was an interesting statistic. The average attendance in weekend services, I'm going to come back to that statistic a little bit. That one is something that we are a little bit off of our peak, and that's presenting a bit of a challenge for us. And then over in the far right, another interesting thing, we are getting a pretty significant chunk of our giving now through the online and mobile platforms, but our biggest spike was actually last year and not the current year that we're talking about now. So that number was roughly comparable. It's up a little bit, but not up significantly, and I'm going to come back to that theme in a little bit as well. All right, moving on to the next slide, let me just share with you the total picture of our income at ACAC. This is a graph that represents all of our revenues. The vast majority of it, of course, being a church, comes from your free will contributions. So what you donate either online or through the offering plate is by far and away the biggest piece of it, and just a couple percentage points come in through either rentals that we have, program income, for instance, when you register for a class and pay a nominal fee, that contributes to our efforts here. For the year, we were basically flat in terms of our total take. You see the number is an upward arrow, but it's upward by just a little bit, 0.2%, and about $11,000. Now, how did that money get shifted across the pie is what's always of interest to us. We don't instruct or tell you how to do that, nor do we have any formula that says for every dollar that comes out, here's how we're going to disperse it. When you earmark and you do our Giving 1, 2, 3 plans, we honor those donations as you prescribe them. The one in the 1, 2, 3 is what funds our general fund, which is our biggest base of the ministry here. Most of our employees, over 90% of them, are paid through the general fund. All of the building, the heating, the lighting, everything that you're doing here, the microphone I'm using, everything here, generally speaking, will be paid for or maintained out of that general fund. All of the other things are special projects. The piece of the pie that went to that was relatively comparable. That number is at 76%, and most years when we've adjusted it for other factors, most of the years it's ranged between 72 and 76 in that number. So when we saw our general fund income go down a little bit, it's something that we have to watch very closely because we operate pretty much razor thin in terms of how we do our ministries here, and it doesn't represent a huge, so what may look like a small percentage shift can be a huge shift in terms of our ability to meet our needs. If you jump down into the other funds, that was the one that was up the most, primarily on a percentage basis and somewhat on an absolute dollar basis. And there's a little footnote here, maybe hard to read if you're in the back. Some of that giving was to expanded influence. And so we've started to see some seed funders. We haven't really promoted a campaign. We've talked about doing more of that in 2017. That'll be something that you'll be hearing from Nate and the work of his department and others. But there were some donors that were willing to give in advance of what the specific needs were. And so we set up several funds for communications, for capacity and so forth, and church plants. So the very three things that you heard an update today are those things that we have started to fund that way. And so to some degree, we might say that perhaps some of the giving, if the giving was flat, that those initiatives maybe took up where most of the directed giving was going to for the year. So that's both good and bad. That means that we are definitely embracing the initiatives that we believe the Holy Spirit is leading us to pursue, but it also can mean that our ongoing ministries can be starved if we're not careful, and that's a theme that's going to continue here. So let me show you how the year sort of played out in terms of where we thought we were going to be and where we are, so if we can move to the next slide. This slide will sort of repeat itself in a few forms. Really what I want to call your attention to are the blue bars here. This shows our income. The blue bars are our income. Our orange bars are the budget. The gold bars represent our expenses in each year. And the final, the green or sort of aqua-looking bars were our expense budgets. And so if you take a look at this, probably the most pertinent thing to realize is in any given year, the second and the fourth bars are the same, okay? They represent our budgets. We budget to take in what we expect to spend. We're a break-even operation. So those two bars will always be the same. Now, what happened from year to year, if you look at the blue bar and sort of look going across, you know, our actual income in the general fund did fall a little bit. Our contributions fell almost 2%, but some of our other income was up a little bit. Overall, though, we were still down a little bit for the year in terms of income. Now, on the next slide, let's see what happened on the expense side. Our expenses actually fell, and as I summarized in the video, this was our great praise for the year. When we went into the year, we expected our expenses to actually increase rather significantly. We were expecting the lease at 4AC, which was flat for a number of years. We paid the same dollars we paid in 2003, we were paying in 2015. And so we'd expect any landlord to eventually increase the rent. But thankfully, the same landlord that's doing that is the same one that we're partnering with on the parking garage. And so through some negotiations, we were able to keep that flat, keep the expense from rising. That was the biggest contributor. We were also able to sort of restructure how we use some of the staff, maintain some of the operations. The winter wasn't as severe. That helped us out a lot. And although the healthcare premiums rose sharply, probably not as sharply as we thought, which was also a praise compared to the benchmarks we see from other nonprofits and other ministries in the area. So the sum total of that, if you look on the next slide, is we were able to do the same ministry with $400,000 less than we thought we would need. Again, as I mentioned in the video, that's about a month's worth of offerings. So that really reduced the burden on the congregation for the year and got us through with a razor thin, and I'm pretty confident if you're sitting all the way in the back, you can't see how small our surplus is, okay? It was only $5,000 on a $5 million taking our general fund. That's barely enough to run this ministry for a couple of hours. So by the time we wake up in the morning, that was gone, okay? But that just shows you that this ministry has always been a faith journey, okay? Every dollar you give matters. Everything that you do in terms of your time and treasury and talents matter to God and matter here. All right, so as we move along, what I wanted to point out on the next slide, and I don't expect anybody to be an economist here, so I'm going to summarize this in one slide, and that is that compared to where we were 8 years ago, our giving hasn't really kept up with inflation. Inflation hasn't been all that strong in those years, okay, but our giving, we have continuously engineered our existing ministries to be as lean as possible, all right? And so the message here as we move into expanded influence is there really is no room to take from what we're doing today and say, well, let's just quit doing these things and plow them into some of the expanded influence initiatives. That challenge is the challenge. That money will have to come from other sources, from all of us really thinking through, digging deeply, okay? There really is. We have taken out, we have looked at all the programs from probably about 2004, 2005 era to now, and they are, I'm almost worried that if we starve them anymore, the people leading those ministries wouldn't really be able to carry out the ministries the way that we need to do it. But I think you can see, you know, we've done a lot of things. You take things like the Kids Club this year, consolidating onto one night. Everything has been looked over. No stone has been left unturned in terms of how we can do ministry as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to end by summarizing two things. One is our challenges, and some of them I've kind of touched upon, and then lastly, our praises. So if we move on to the next slide, the one thing that I want to point out is, you know, we had talked about our attendance as a church, and I showed you the infographic before. For years, you've probably been hearing Rock say about we sort of hit a plateau. We thought some of the plateau was really due to capacity, and so we tried to make as much capacity by expanding the number of services we've offered. We peaked in 2004 and then sort of rode that plateau down a little bit, and by 2010, we were pretty much at the same level, within a shade of the same level as we were at 2004. Since then, it's been a slow but bumpy ride downward, and we're off about 10% from our peak in 2010 in terms of weekend attendance. That is not a good sign. When we last looked at it as a leadership a few years ago, we thought perhaps, we actually showed by the sign-in logs that there were more people either visiting or attending ACAC, and so we drew the conclusion after doing some focus groups and some analysis that it's more people attending less often, okay? So you're either experiencing a plateau or a slight decline by maybe people who might have made it, 4 weekends out of 5, now making it 2 weekends out of 3 or whatever, and the percentages are starting to go down. We're not sure that that's still the case. We'd have to do some fresh analysis, because I would imagine if people are a little busier in their lives that we're hoping at least that it's not a downward slide and we only see you once a year. That would not be a good thing. But anyway, that lack of challenge, that challenges us, because if you look at the third bullet point, despite the growth in online giving, and it's, again, more than 1 million of our 6 million is coming in that way, people in seats do tend to be correlated with our offering here. And we can continue to push systematic giving online and so on and so forth, but it does seem to matter. It seems to matter in terms of engagement, in terms of the experience and so forth. And so that's a challenge. That's something we're going to have to look at. My point in the middle I sort of touched on before, and that is we've run this place pretty lean. Okay, there is no endowment. So when we talk about expanded influence, there is going to be a challenge. And I think when God reordered our design and said, don't build the sanctuary first, don't expand the sanctuary first, these are the other needs, these are the provision, well, that really inverts our economic model as well, right? Because the thought is if you build a bigger sanctuary and there's room for more people, that those more people mean more donors, and ideally with the donors we would then have the money and the finances to fund the burdens and the things that we want to do. Twist that around, and now we're into a pay-it-forward world, right, where the people that are here are going to have to be willing to invest and believe that this is what the Spirit wants for our future. Now, on a final note, our praises on the last slide here. The one thing after you go through all of this, it can sometimes be a little daunting to take the numbers in and the challenges that we face in, but every year from when the little man in the black coat launched this place under the Holy Spirit's direction till now, God has provided our needs. Somehow we get there. This past year, we started strong in the fall, pretty strong in Christmas time, went down a little bit in the winter into early spring, rebounded a bit at the very end to get to where we needed to be by the end of the fiscal year. Somehow God provides. That's not a reason to just sort of go on autopilot and forget about us, but somehow God provides. The other thing, the last couple points that I want to make in terms of a praise, some of you may not see all the details, or you may be involved in some of the areas that you're involved in, but not see the total picture of the 130 ministries. But we do a lot of innovative things here that don't cost a lot. You saw a small snippet of it before. For instance, the Northview Heights project that Dr. Sigmund's leading, et cetera. We're helping people translate, learn English, hiring translators. They're able to then teach people English, teach people the Word of God. Those kinds of things we're spending very little money on, okay? A few dollars to get a few translators engaged, lots of volunteers, very little footprint in terms of buildings and so forth needed to do that, places that we can loan and leverage and so forth. That's just one example of it. We also partner, as you can see, with other ministries. Keith mentioned UIF, Women's Choice, Light of Life. We're a church that's not afraid, as tight as we are with the monies that we have coming in, to donate and to bless some of that money. We do support Light of Life. We do support some of the ministries around us. And so our church has taken, and I think rightfully so, a very kingdom principle. It doesn't have to be ACAC doing it. It's God's work that we're doing, and I guess we're just running errands. And so as God provides us through our funds, we run those errands for the Spirit and handle them in many different ways. And I think that's something really unique about an urban church that's next door neighbors to a lot of ministries that are in need. And so with that, that's going to conclude my piece of it. I am going to call the Master of Ceremonies, Pastor Ross Owens, back up here for a time of Q&A.